Okay, so the test is going to be in chapters 12 and 13. I've made a review video. I'll post that today. So it'll give you exactly what you need to know. I think the review video is maybe 35 minutes, something like that, 40 minutes. So today we are going to finish talking about home ownership. And what we were doing last time, well, first, let's just review where we were. We showed that you could use we talked about how you can use the same techniques to calculate house payments as you can car payments, because they're essentially the same type of loan. They're an installment loan, which means you take out the loan, you make a monthly payment. The monthly payment is more than the interest you owe on that money for a month's worth of use. And so that additional amount that you pay in excess, you take that from the balance, and so as time goes along, the balance becomes lower, hence the amount of interest becomes less, hence the amount you pay off towards the balance is more per month, and at some point you get to a zero balance. Okay. So one of the key drivers in terms of being able to afford a house is what your interest rate is, because early on in your calculations, or early on in your payment schedule, the interest is a significant part of the payment. That's in contrast to a car payment, because car loans are of a shorter duration. They're usually 5-6 years, and whereas if you're doing it over a 30-year period, the amount that your interest can be significantly higher. So let's actually just look at that. So I'm going to go online here and put in some numbers. And really, the percentage of how much your payment goes to your balance doesn't really depend upon your loan. It depends more on the terms of your loan, in terms of the length of the loan. So I'm just going to type in home mortgage calculator with amortization. Okay. Yep. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to plug you up. Sorry. You're right. Yeah, that would help, wouldn't it? Thanks for letting me know. So here is loan type, home purchase, let's say $300,000, 30-year mortgage. Put in the zip code, push the calculate button. And you can see if we look at the oh, you're still not showing up? Oh, sorry. There we go. Sorry. Okay, so there's the table. So if you have this loan, $300,000 loan, your first payment is going to be $1,300 interest and only $344 principal. So most of it's going to go to the interest. Now as you get down, later in your loan, the amount you can see now, the amount of interest is less than the amount that's being paid towards the principal. The payment stays the same, and by the time you get to the end, the amount of interest you're paying versus the amount you're paying towards the principal is flipped around. So I showed you this chart last time. Mostly we were interested in the red and the brown curves, which were the 30 and 15-year fixed rate mortgages. And what you can see is that, at least historically, with this back to 1992, the current interest rates for homes are the lowest they've been for a long time. And I've got some more graphs here that kind of show the same information. So this is since 1986. I bought my house in 1986, so we did it as a 30-year mortgage initially, So our rate was 10.25% versus 4%. So basically that made the payments about twice as much as they would be now, relatively speaking, to the loan. And you can see again that since 2013, these are significantly lower than historical averages. One other thing about, you know, the loan values closely match the behavior or the performance of CDs because they're kind of tied to the same index. So not only have home interest rates been historically low for the last 5 or 6 years, certificates of deposit have been historically low. So it's good for people buying homes. Unfortunately, it kind of what low interest rates do two things. One is they might make it so you can afford a more expensive house, but then people think, well, I can raise the price of the house because now they can afford a more expensive house. So it does tend to also drive up housing prices, which is kind of self-defeating because then you end up, and so if you try to go the other direction of raising interest rates, then instead of saying, oh, they can afford a more expensive house, it comes to that they can't afford a house at all. And then the house, if you do that too quickly, then the housing market goes, and then there's an economic crisis. So there's all these interactions. One thing you can also see back in 1984, CDs you could get 10% return on, which was probably as good as the stock market at that point. Nowadays, you almost have to put money in the stock market to make any decent return, which is, that's a problem in itself. And even going back further here, CD rates historically have been around 5%, except the most recent history. So one thing you might see on TV when they have these guys who are trying to sell you their business as far as representing you in terms of investments, a lot of times they'll say past performance is not a predictor of future returns. And so, this is the past performance, but the most recent performance is this. So it depends on how far you go back as far as past. Okay, I'm not going to talk about adjustable rate mortgages right now. What I'm going to talk about is, besides your loan payment, what other costs are associated with buying a house and maintaining a house. When I was driving in this morning, I was listening to public radio, and they said that the most affordable, the place in Virginia where you can most quickly recoup your costs when you buy a house is Roanoke, Virginia. And mostly because the housing prices in Roanoke are much less than in, say, Richmond or Tidewater or especially Northern Virginia. And you'll see why you can recoup those costs faster. They've said that this is renting versus buying. They said that the costs for purchasing a house you can recoup in about a year in Roanoke, because the fact that you are rent relative to paying a mortgage is such that it's advantageous for buying a house in Roanoke, whereas in these other places, if you live in Alexandria or Arlington, which is Northern Virginia, it takes you 5 years to recoup the amount of money you spend to buy the house. So then you just break even as far as the amount you save buying a house versus renting an apartment or renting a house of a similar size. So when you buy a house, there are usually three big factors. One is a down payment, which is something that you do recoup as long as the housing price doesn't drop, because that money that you're paying as a down payment is making your loan less, and if you sell the house with the same amount, then you're going to get that money back. So that's not something that you're just throwing away or not being able to have equity in. The other two things are closing costs. And closing costs are usually the responsibility of the buyer. So if you're a buyer, you have to come up with the money for the down payment, and you have to come up with the money for the closing costs. So closing costs consists of a whole bunch of different fees, and a lot of those. So a lot of those fees are dependent or a percentage of the house price. So the closing costs go up as a percentage of the purchase price. Sometimes that makes sense, sometimes that's just the way it is. So there is things like the loan origination fee. So when you go apply for a loan, you may not get the loan, so they don't want to do all this work and not get any money out of it. So they'll charge you something up front to start the loan. I don't know what a broker loan fee means. Title insurance, that's you have a title for the house, and they do a search to make sure that the person who's selling the house really owns the house and the land. And so you want to make sure that you're actually buying it from somebody who legitimately owns the land. So they'll do a title search, but there's always the risk that something would go wrong, and so you pay an insurance fee in case something does go wrong. The bottom line is there are a lot of fees, okay? And typically closing costs are about 3 to 5% of the selling price. So let's just kind of think about this. Let's say you're the buyer. And let's say you're buying a $200,000 home, which in Covington can get you a pretty nice house. In Northern Virginia, it gets you a shack. So $200,000, so that's the house price. Now, usually they want you to put at least 10% down. So 10% of $200,000 is $20,000. And then you have closing costs. So that's the down payment. I'll just put CC for closing costs. Let's assume it's 4%. So 4% of that is $8,000. So the total that you would need as a buyer is $28,000. Now again, the down payment you can recoup when you sell the house, but the closing costs you don't get back. The other thing, as a seller, what you have to pay there is you have to pay the realtor fees. And they're usually total. It depends. When somebody's selling a house, they typically have somebody who lists the house, but the person who lists the house may not be the person that sells the house. So you don't have to be the person that lists it to show the house and possibly sell it. So if the person who lists the house sells the house, they get the total amount, which is about 6%. So again, 6% of $200,000 is about $12,000. Okay. So if you buy a house, you pay $8,000 for closing costs. If you sell the house a year later, you pay $12,000 for the realtor. So you're essentially putting $20,000 that you're not going to get back, and that's the money they're talking about recouping as far as breaking even. Your house price has to increase in value enough over that time period that you're going to be able to recoup those costs, as well as the differential between what you're paying in rent and what you're paying in mortgage and other costs. So that's
If you don't use a realtor, then you essentially you just don't have to pay that money. So what's the upside, I guess, of using?
Yeah, so if you sell the house yourself, so for sale by buyer, you will still have to hire a lawyer to handle the details. So I'll give you an example of when we saw my mother's house after she died. My brother lives in the same town as she lived in, and his line of work, he rents commercial property for a company. So I figured he has some experience in dealing with contracts or whatever. So and he needs the money more than the realtor does. So I said, okay, we'll be a nice guy. I talked to my brother and we said, okay, we'll let Andrew try to sell the house and we'll give him some of the money, which we were originally we were thinking of maybe 6%, which is a pretty good chunk of money. Anyways, ultimately he did sell the house, but he ended up calling. He actually ended up using the person who bought the house said, I want a realtor involved because there are things that selling the house yourself you could get into trouble. So you have the realtor and you have the realtor has a lawyer and you have a lawyer, and to make sure there's no issues happening as far as whatever can go wrong with the house. So we ended up paying my brother 3% and giving the realtor 3% because it was kind of like he was listing it and they were selling it. So it ultimately was 6%. So I don't know the specific details of what trouble you can get into. You're still going to have to pay some money for a lawyer, and I think the lawyer costs would be part of that realtor fee. So the realtor would have the lawyer. You would have to get a lawyer separately. I don't know what that difference is, but you could save some money. And I think you can also negotiate sometimes, depending upon where you are, to less than 6%, because it depends on if you have a $200,000 house, 6%, that's $12,000. That's a lot of money. You know, if you're selling a inexpensive house, then the amount's a lot less, and so you might not have as much room for negotiation. If you're selling $1 million house at 6%, $60,000, they're probably not doing $60,000 worth of work, so you might be able to negotiate. It is negotiable to a certain extent. Okay, so that is now. If you put less than 10% down, a lot of times you have to take out something called private mortgage insurance, and what that is they're saying that because you can't come up with 10% down, you're probably not as financially stable or as good a risk as somebody who can put down a larger down payment. For example, when we moved to Covington, I just got out of school and I didn't have a lot of cash to put as a down payment, so we could only put 5% down on our house, which was 5%. We had a $75,000 house, so that's 5% of that's $4,000 approximately. Okay, we didn't have $8,000 to do it, so we put a smaller down payment, and then every month we had to pay an extra amount called private mortgage insurance, and you pay that until you've paid off a certain amount of your loan, so the equity in the house is big enough that you can stop paying the private mortgage insurance. We ended up refinancing our house about 4 or 5 years after we started paying on it. One of the reasons was to get rid of the private mortgage insurance so we didn't have to pay that. We also we started as a 30-year mortgage, but because once, after I'd worked for a couple of years, working a real job as an engineer, I had enough money that we ended up paying more towards the payment each month, and we ended up paying our loan off in 15 years. You can do that if you can afford more than the amount, the actual payment. That will go towards reducing your balance, and if you do that, you can essentially have a lower length mortgage, which has two advantages. One is you pay less interest, and for us, we were trying to pay off our house before we sent our kids to college. So we paid our mortgage off in 1999, and Jennifer went to college in 2000. It was very close. I mean, it might have even been within months of each other. Okay, so that's closing costs, realtor fees. Now, just owning a home, you've got all these other additional costs. So you've got your taxes, which are property taxes. You got insurance, which is typically, there's two kinds of insurance. There's insurance on your house, the physical house, and there's also, that usually has liability as well. So this homeowner's insurance includes both the value of the house in case you have a fire, or if somebody trips and hurts themselves and there's a liability associated with it. So just to give you a kind of idea, in Covington, our house, which is probably worth $150,000, we pay about $1,000 a year property taxes. So that's something you don't usually see in your rent because that's included as part of your rent, but the person who owns a house is paying property tax. For our home, we pay about $500 a year for homeowners insurance. Again, as a renter, you don't see that cost. Then you have maintenance, and the things that we're talking about as far as maintenance, I've got on my next page. Every 25 years you've got to usually put a new roof on your house, and so when we moved in, the house was about 20 years old, so we had to replace the roof, and we've lived there for 30 years, so we've replaced the roof again. Okay, painting, that's usually not as expensive. You do it yourself. Carpet. If you have a furnace, we've had to replace the furnace. We've replaced carpeting. We've painted. The water heater's broken since we own the house. You do remodeling because a lot of times you buy a house that doesn't look exactly like you'd like it. We had to replace our deck. So all these things together can be fairly significant. I'm just giving you an estimate, but we've probably spent at least $50,000 on all this stuff over 30 years. So that comes out to about $1,500 a year on average, just to keep the place, well, not just to keep it where it was, to improve it to a level that we were satisfied with. So that's another, that's variable depending upon whether you're remodeling or whether you're just trying to keep things running. So I'm just going to say $500 to $1,500 per year. So your total cost to your house is going to be your loan payment, your property tax, which is usually included within your loan, just so you don't have to worry about that. We have to pay it separately because we don't have a mortgage anymore. Your homeowner's insurance, maintenance. So it does add up. It's not just, I can afford that payment, or you've got to really consider the whole entire cost of the house. So next. So a lot of times you'll hear people say there's a tax advantages associated with owning a home. So I'm going to explain how that works. And also I'm going to, as a consequence, I have to talk about taxes. And I did some calculations yesterday relative to the new tax law. So I haven't had to deal with a new tax law yet. And it's kind of interesting because you don't really hear about this. And sometimes you have to read the fine print to understand what's going on. So let's talk about taxes. So when you do taxes, you have your gross income, which is what you get paid. If you have any savings accounts and you have interest, you have those. If you have 401ks, you don't have to worry about that because those are deferred till later. You might own some mutual funds outside of a tax deferred status. There you have to deal with things called capital gains and dividends. What else might be a part of your income? If somebody wills you an IRA, you have to take a certain amount out each year. So my mother left all of us 3 sons some money out of a IRA, and we have to take a minimum amount per year. It's called a required minimum distribution. So that's part of my income. And then you can deduct certain things from your income. The ones that apply to home ownership are whether you itemize your deductions or whether you take a standard deduction. Now, up until this year, the standard deduction was dependent upon whether you were single, married, or I think head of household. Okay. So for my particular case, the standard deduction for a married couple for this last year was $12,000. So that's one thing you can remove. You can take that off of your income, so you can reduce that so you're not taxed on that amount. There's also what are called exemptions, and that's based upon the people in your house. If you have children, you can claim yourself as an exemption. You can claim your spouse as an exemption. Any dependent children you can claim as exemptions. And I think each exemption this year was for a married couple filing jointly was $44,050. So you take that times 2, so you get $8,050. Now the exemptions doesn't come into play relative to buying a house, but it does come into play explaining the new tax law. Now, there's also itemized deductions, which I'm sure none of you do yet, because you really have to actually own a home to have any chance of itemizing deductions. So the main things that you can put into your itemized deductions is interest from your home loan. You can also deduct state income tax and I guess local income tax, which we don't have, but I think they do have in New York. State income tax and property tax. And you can, there's certain charity. Okay, so if you give to a church or you give to anything, to give to Salvation Army, you can deduct that if you do itemized deductions. Also, there are certain health-related deductions. Typically, it's hard to do that because the amount that you have to exceed to be able to include those in your itemized deductions is large enough that unless you're really sick and you don't have, normally if you have health insurance, you're probably not going to have to do that. Okay, so that's usually doesn't happen very often. So those are the things, and if the itemized deductions is greater than $12,000, greater than the standard deduction, then there is some tax advantage for owning a home. But if you add all these things together and it's less than $12,000, then there is no tax advantage to owning a home. And it's very dependent upon how much of a loan you have and where you live. So I'm going to just use me as an example. So let's assume I own a home, which I don't. So I never use itemized deductions because there's no hope to get there. So if we think about interest, the maximum interest you're going to pay would be the first year when you have the highest balance. And so I'm just going to approximate it. So this is going to the interest. The maximum amount that I would pay for interest would be the loan amount. So let's say I have a $150,000 home, and the yearly interest rate is 4%. So I'll get $6,000. So 0.04 times 150,000, $6,000. Okay, so that's the interest. If I'm affording this kind of house, I'm probably making maybe $50,000. Let's say, somebody who earns $50,000 could afford my house. So the way you do that is you have to know what your state income tax is, and it's approximately 5% of your income. And we'll assume that, just to make it conservative here, I'm just going to use the full amount of my salary. Really, you'd use something that would be less because I'd be able to reduce so these are all over estimates. So let's say $2,500. That's my state tax. My property tax, so in Allegheny County, my property tax is about $1,000 a year. So that's property tax. So if I don't give anything to charity, and I'm not really sick. Those are pretty much the three things that I can include in my itemized deductions. So my total itemized deductions would be equal to 6,000 plus 2,500 plus 1,000, which is about $9,500, which is less than $12,000, which means don't itemize. Doesn't do you any good. Okay. So for my scenario, living in Allegheny County, having a reasonable, decent house, making a okay salary, a decent salary, there will be no tax advantages to owning a home. So where does this happen? Well, for one thing, would be if your interest rate was a lot higher, which you don't want. But for example, back when I bought my house, it was 10%. So if I was buying this same house nowadays with a 10% interest rate, I'd have $15,000 in interest. And so that would push me over $12,000, which would make itemizing advantageous. The second thing is if you live in a state that has high taxes, either property taxes or state income taxes. So places like California, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, they all have high state income tax or high combination of state income taxes and property taxes. The other one is how expensive a house you buy. So this is scenario B, and I'm going to make this up. I'm guessing. So assume my daughter. Okay, I think she probably has. She lives in Staten Island. Okay, so she has a $500,000 house, and we'll still keep 4% interest. So that's the interest. Again, we're just doing estimates here. Would be 500,000 times 4%, which is $20,000. Okay. I'll just say state income tax plus property tax. I don't really know what it is exactly. I haven't looked it up. But let's say instead of being $3,500, it's and it depends on their income too. I mean, if you're making $50,000 here, but you're making $200,000 here, then they're going to be paying a lot more even with the same tax rate. So I'm guessing she's probably paying $20,000, okay, total. So you add those two together and you're going to get $40,000. So she's probably got, or somebody like her is probably going to have itemized deductions of, say, $40,000. So which is much greater than $12,000. And even if she doesn't own a home, she's still paying that much in just income tax. Well, she might not be paying property tax. So it depends on, you've got to. That's another thing. What's property tax versus income tax? In New Jersey, I don't think they have quite a high income tax, but their property taxes are real high. But even so, I think she would probably be close to the $12,000 even without owning a home. So everything that's above $12,000, she gets tax benefits for it. So going back here, even if you did have enough itemized deductions to be greater than $12,000, it's only the amount over $12,000 that you get any benefit from. It's not from $0. It's not like you get to you're going to already get to deduct $12,000 even if you do no itemized deductions. So the tax benefit is only that above $12,000. And it also depends on what your tax bracket is. So the higher the tax bracket you are in, the bigger benefits you get. So let me talk about that, tax brackets. So I'll write all this down. I'm just trying to give you a basic concept of what's involved. It's not simple. It depends on where you live, how much you make, what the state income taxes are, what your mortgage is, all kinds of stuff. It's not super hard to figure out. It's just you got to take into account everything. Tax rates for 2017. Okay. So these are the, must be 3 more rows here. Where are the 3 rows? Because they didn't do the lower side of it. Where is it? I don't like that. Let me find another one. So this starts at $91,000. They're missing the lower income tax brackets.
I think if you click on the word 3 more rows, it'll show up in the other.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but it's not doing anything.
Oh.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, no, because it wasn't highlighted, so I knew it wasn't going to work. Yeah, here we can look IRS. Maybe that'll work. Yeah, there we go. That's what we're looking for. So, it depends upon what filing status you are. I'm just going to show you married filing jointly. Single, married, there we go. Married filing jointly. So the first $18,000, this is your taxable income, not your gross income. So this is after you have deducted your deductions and your exemptions. So you pay 10% for the first $18,650. Then after $18,650, you pay 15% of the amount over this amount. This is what's called I guess it's progressive because the more income you get, the larger percentage. But there's people who say, oh, if I go over this amount of income, I'm going to have to pay more tax than if I had this income, and that's the complete fallacy. Okay, so if you earned so what people will say is, at $18,650, I only pay 10%, and then they would say, well, if I earn $1 more, I'm going to pay 15%, but they only pay 15% over the amount over $18,000. So if you earned $18,651, you'd pay 10% of $18,000, which would be $1,865, and you'd pay 15% on the $1 that you made more than $18,650. You always heard this at the mill. They'd say, oh, I'm not going to work overtime because that's going to put me in a higher tax bracket and I'll actually make less money. That's not true. So if your husband or somebody or your wife comes home and tells you that, tell them that I said that. So that's not true. You're going to if you earn more money and you get into a higher tax bracket, you are going to be paying a higher rate on that additional income, but you're always going to be making more money. The more you work, the more money you get. Okay, and you have to earn a heck of a lot more to move into some of these higher tax brackets. Okay, so my example of living in Covington earning $50,000, if I were able to have the itemized deductions greater than $12,000, the tax advantage would be equal to the difference between the amount that I itemized and $12,000 multiplied by the tax rate that I'm earning. So at $50,000, my tax rate is 15%. And let's say I itemized $14,000 of deductions. So $14,000 is $2,000 more than $12,000. So I would save 15% of $2,000 by owning a home. Now, if I'm earning $200,000, then the amount that I have above the itemized deductions, I'm going to save 28% of that money because that's my tax rate. So the more you earn, the more you get a tax benefit from owning a home. So let's just write 2 scenarios here. Let's say you earn, this is the person that earns $50,000. And let's say their itemized deductions are $15,000. So what is the tax benefit for owning a home? Well, because owning a home is going to push you where your itemized deductions is more than your standard deductions. So the tax benefit is going to be equal to the difference between your itemized deductions and the standard deduction multiplied by the tax rate for $50,000. So that's going to be 3,000 times 0.15, which is $450. Okay, that might be one payment or less. Okay, so that's the tax benefit. If you divide that by 12, it's only 450 divided by 12 is $38 a month. So that would reduce your effective house payment by $38 a month. So we could say payment effectively $38 a month less. Now let's look at the second case. Let's say somebody is earning $200,000. So that's their salary. Their itemized deductions are going to be, say, $30,000. That's because they're going to be paying more interest than their loan. They're probably making more money, so they're going to have more state income tax. They're probably paying more on their, so the interest is higher, the state income tax is higher. What else could it be? Maybe they have more charitable contributions because they feel like they have more money to give to charity. So the tax benefit in this case would be equal to the difference between their itemized deductions and the standard deduction multiplied by the marginal tax rate, which for $200,000 is 28%. So we get 30,000 minus 12,000 times 0.28, which is $5,040. Okay, which if we divide that by 12, so that's our tax benefit. So the payment is effectively equal to $420 a month less. So that's a big difference, right? $38 a month for a payment versus, of course, this guy is going to have a much bigger payment, but it's this tax benefit is more than 4 times. This home loan is well, this is actually their salary. I don't know what their house price is. I mean, but if you had the house price 4 times as much, the tax benefit is more than 4 times as much for the person with the expensive house and the higher salary, which kind of seems kind of unfair to some extent, right? Depends on what political leanings and things you're feeling about. So that's how the tax benefit works. Now, in the new tax law, so let me explain what the new tax law says. This is the old, that's this year's. The new, which is, I guess it applies for this year's income. So what you have is the standard deduction. And again, I'm doing married filing jointly. So the standard deduction here is $12,000. Here, the standard deduction is $24,000. So for somebody who's not itemizing, like me, that would seem great. I mean, I'm going to get $12,000 extra dollars that I can take off of my salary, my adjusted gross income, and I don't have to pay tax on that. And if I'm in the 15% tax bracket, which I think I am, $12,000 times 0.15, that's $1,800 a year. That's pretty good. I'd have to pay less in taxes because of that. Also, they're also reducing the tax rates for the different income brackets. Now, one thing they don't talk about, so when they're trying to make this tax bill sound really good, they'll forget to tell you what they did about exemptions. So for exemptions, here it's $4,050 per person, per deducted person who's a what's it called, dependent, or your spouse. Whereas the new, no exemptions. So if you actually look at my scenario, here I have two people plus that. Before I was able to deduct, I would be able to deduct $20,100 from my income due to standard deduction and the exemptions. The new tax law, I'm only going to be able to deduct $24,000, so it's not as big an improvement. And if you go back and if you probably look at any of the press releases, they probably forget to mention this. And if you have a family of 4, then you actually come out worse because you wouldn't be able to claim 4 times the exemptions. Now if you don't itemize deductions, you're actually worse off now than you were with the old tax law.
Is that only if you own a home though?
No, this is standard deductions. So this is even if you don't own a home.
I was told that we actually get more for kids under the new law.
That might be a child tax credit, which is a different thing. Yeah. So that's another place you can get money. So they probably increase so they probably, I mean, if you look at it with this, so this is somebody who's trying to make it look really bad, but there are other things. So you do get money for exemptions. What they probably have done is increase the child tax credit to compensate for the reducing the exemptions. And I don't know where it all comes out. So for me, I don't have any children at home, so I am saving some money. I did a spreadsheet yesterday to see how much money I actually would save. Take into account the fact that I will have more to deduct from my income, and also to reflect the lower tax rate. Let me show you what the new tax rates are. So that's this year. Tax tables or tax rates for 2018. Okay. So as a married couple filing jointly, instead of being 15% tax rate, I'll be the 12% tax rate. So I'll get 2 benefits. One will be more deductions because the sum of my standard deduction and my exemptions is less this year. It's going up, so that'll decrease from my income. Plus, I'll have a lower tax rate. I'll show you the spreadsheet I came up with yesterday. I was curious about this. There we go, tax benefits. So what I did was I took what this is a salary in increments of 1,000. This is what is this number? Oh, this is the salary minus the current standard deduction of $12,000 plus 2 times the standard exemption. So this would be my taxable income using 2017. Here what I did was I took oh no, this is the deductions. This would be my taxable income. So let's say I make $50,000. I have currently have $20,100 in deductions. So my taxable income would be $29,900. And if you apply the current tax rate of 15% on that, so you actually pay $1,855 plus 15% over that amount. Over 80. The first $18,550 is at 10%. That's where you get that number from. And the amount over $18,550, you pay 15%. So that comes out to be $3,557. Okay. Then what I did is I took the new standard deduction, which was $24,000, and this would be my new taxable income. So you can see my new taxable income versus my old taxable income is less. So I paid less tax. Also, the tax rate on this new taxable income is less. It's only 12%. So this column gives me the new tax. This is my old tax. This is my new tax. The difference is tax savings due to the new tax law. So if I earn $50,000 and I don't itemize deductions, I'm going to save about $820 a year, which comes out to be about $31 per pay period. I get paid every 2 weeks. Now, if I make, let's say I make $60,000, then I would save almost $1,100 in taxes. And as I go higher, I'm going to save more money. This is kind of these are the tax benefits due to the new law if you don't itemize deductions. And if I look at my paycheck since the new year, it comes out to actually be pretty close. It's about $50 a month, I think, based on $50 every 2 weeks. So that's 50 times 24, which is about $1,000. Okay. So so that's how it affects me. Now, how does it affect somebody who owns a home? Well, going back here, this person that say itemized deductions to $15,000 now gets absolutely $0 as far as a tax benefit. So people who are of moderate means, who own a reasonably priced house in a non-high house price area, they're probably not going to be able to, they're not going to have they won't have to do itemized deductions, which is, it's nice because you don't have to do itemized deductions, makes your taxes easier, but they won't get a tax benefit. You're less likely to get a tax benefit for home ownership when you are just a moderate middle class person. The other thing is that this person, instead of subtracting 30,000 from 12,000, will now be subtracting 24,000 from 30,000. And hence, they will also have this one got zero benefit. This person has a much lower tax benefit for owning a home. So it turns out that the new tax law hurts, the people it hurts the most are people who live in high tax, high cost of living, high home price states, which turn out to be New Jersey, New York, California, Connecticut, Massachusetts, probably Washington State, Oregon State. Is it a coincidence that those states are the ones that voted Democratic, and the people that it's going to hurt the most, help the most, are people who live in states that voted Republican? No, it is not a coincidence, okay? So not only does it hurt, it makes home ownership have less tax advantage. It's also punitive to states that didn't vote Republican. They won't say that in public, but I'm pretty sure it's true. Okay. Okay, so there are a few homework problems here in section 4, 2, 6, 11, and 16. There's no homework for section 3. So you might, after all this, why do you even want to think about buying a house? Well, let's say my daughter Jennifer, where she was living, which was Brooklyn, she was probably paying $2,400 a month for rent for a single bedroom apartment. Now she lives in Staten Island. She owns a home, which I think her mortgage is about the same amount as she was paying in rent. She has a 3-bedroom house with a yard, and so she definitely made a movement upward. If she bought a house in Brooklyn, in the area where she was living in, she probably would, to get an equivalent size house, she probably would have had to pay over $1 million to do that, which she couldn't afford. I mean, $1 million mortgage probably was going to be, well, we can actually see what it is. At least see what a payment on $1 million house is right now. So, house payment. Okay, so let's say you buy $1 million house, and you put, see, they're automatically putting in 20% down, which is a heck of a lot of money. So you're going to have a mortgage of $800,000. They're putting in 3.88%. And again, this number is dependent upon your credit score. So in this case, for a car, yeah, it makes some difference. For a house, it can make a huge difference. So let's see what the payments for a $800,000 loan are. So here are the payments. First mortgage direct, 4.25%. I think actually the calculator, there we go. So with 3.88, it's $3,764 a month. So she was paying about $2,400 for rent in Brooklyn, Park Slope. And if she bought a house, she would probably be paying $3,700. So that's significantly higher. Whereas I think her house probably, her mortgage is probably about that much. So I'll put $600,000. I think it was a $600,000 house. Yeah, no. So then you come out to $2,258 a month, which she was paying about that for rent. So that's one thing. How do rents compare with your mortgage payments? With the low interest rates that you have right now, that can, if you buy in Covington, let's say you buy in Covington, you can buy a house in downtown Covington that's not rat infested, probably, for maybe, well, somebody bought a house in our neighborhood for $100,000, and it's well cared for. It's nothing wrong with the house. I'd live there myself. $100,000. Calculate the monthly payment for that. It's $375, which is probably less than most apartments sell for in Covington. I don't know. I don't rent an apartment, but that seems like a pretty good rent price. And pardon me?
You put 20% down.
Yeah, I know I did. Even if you don't put 20% down, if you put, let's say you put 5% down. Okay, so you're up to $450 a month. So, that's probably comparable to rent on a 2-bedroom apartment maybe in Covington, I'm guessing, where you get a house. So that's one thing. You got to compare it. Now, of course, you are going to have to pay personal property. I mean, you're going to have to pay. You're going to have to pay property tax on it. You're going to have to pay utilities. But it's not. That's a decent house. I think if you rented that house, you'd be paying significantly more than that. The other thing is to think about that if you rent an apartment, you can't really do much to it. So if you want to do decorating, If you wanted to make it your own, might be able to. They might let you paint it, but maybe not. So it does give you the flexibility. And if you're planning on staying somewhere for 30 years, in 30 years you're going to have this paid for, and there at that point you're not going to pay rent anymore. So ideally, if you can pay for your house before you retire, that's one less expense, which is a significant expense, and it means your retirement income would be a lot less than if you're renting forever. So it's certainly a nice thing to think about, having it paid off at some point. I know it's a nice feeling for me not having to worry about a house payment. Makes it so that I can either retire earlier if I wanted to, or it means that I can not be worried about making ends meet as a retiree. One other thing to think about, though, is that and it doesn't make as much difference when you have a low interest rate, but if you go to a 15-year mortgage instead of a 30-year mortgage, the payment goes up, but it doesn't go up as much as you think it would be. You'd think if you paid off the house in half the time, your payment would be twice as much. But you can see that if I go to 30 years, it's $447, and if I go to 15 years, then it's $697. So it's about 50% more. Pay the house off in half the time, your payment goes up 50%. So one advantage of a mortgage versus rent is rents will continue to go up, whereas a mortgage will stay fixed. So right now, when you first buy the house, you may say, well, it's about the same for renting or buying, but in 10 years, when your rent's gone up 20 or 30%, but your house payment stayed the same, now you're going to be at an advantage. So I think it makes sense, if you plan on staying somewhere for a long period of time, to buy a house. If you're only staying somewhere for a short period of time, it's probably, unless the housing market is increasing in value and you can count on it, it's probably better to rent than to buy. So if you move to a new location, unless you're selling an old house and buying a new house, if you're just moving there without owning a house in a previous location, it probably makes sense to rent initially, for one thing. See if you're going to live there for a while. Think about where the housing market is in the cycle. That's one concern right now, is that the bottom dropped out in 2008. It's been 11 years. Things tend to go in cycles. Are we getting near to the top of another cycle? Do you buy when the housing price is high and then the price goes down and then you're underwater and then you've got all those issues to deal with? It's tough being an adult. You got all these things to think about. So, both Heather and Jennifer bought their houses maybe two years ago. So they have, the prices have gone up somewhat. So they probably could sell their house and do okay. The longer you wait, the longer you go from one of these cyclic things, the more likely it is more likely to happen. When we talked about probability, when things are completely random, then you don't know what's going to happen. But the economy does tend to run in cycles. People get too greedy, and for housing prices, they'll keep raising the housing prices, and people will think, oh, I can buy that house because it's going to increase in value. It's a good investment, until they overdo it, and then you drop down again. Same thing happens with stock markets. They go cyclically. Nothing ever happens. Good things don't happen forever. There's ebbs and flows in everything, so you have to think about those kind of things. Anybody have any questions about? Let me make sure I got. So there was something going on at the high school today. What was that?
I don't know. I think they might be set up for prom.
Is that what? Yeah, okay. Because Haley and Karina said.